Writing this report, I get out, right? So I stayed at work until like 10:30.
Yeah.
And I came in the next morning, I was all worried about it. Looked at the report, and I went,
Who wrote this?
holy cow. I thought it was amazing.
At the time last night, like, this is genius. People are going to be so impressed with what I figured out about this. Yeah. For heaven's sakes, don't get this stuff.
I need to
I've done that
do
with a couple
this.
of like insights that this is it. I look at it the next day and I'm like, I'm an idiot. I'm a complete idiot. What does it matter?
What are you going to put in there?
What a noob. Yeah, what a noob.
Espresso maker? It's like, all that cargo space for passing,
Who did I give the floor to last time? Who did I say it starts with the floor?
I looked at here and I think, oh look, there's something that I said, and something about me at the evolution versus hypocrisy.
You did say that.
Yeah.
You're not wrong.
Well, yeah, no, it's like yeah, certain rejoice in that.
Could you please back off and erase that a little bit? Thank you.
There you go. Yeah, that's right.
All right, welcome back. Who did I promise the floor to last time? We left last time. I was like, this person gets the floor. Who was it? I needed to first this down. Yeah.
If it was me,
go ahead. Take it. I don't know what I'm going to do with the floor. Okay. Well, if anybody remembers what it is, jump right back in. But where we are, a quick summary, and I think that I at least delivered what I think is the answer to this question, and then we can see if it applies elsewhere. However, just because I think it's a good answer doesn't mean anybody else thinks it's a good answer. So if you've got other ones we want to talk about, if we want to critique this, fine. But in short, the point that I was making in a quick 60-second wrap-up is for social issues, in fact, basically almost all moral issues, you're either an objectivist or a subjectivist. If you're an objectivist, you know where the rights come from and who has the rights. And if you're a subjectivist, you at least have to be consistent. And so what we did was point out that oftentimes when somebody says something like, you have no right to fill in the blank, have an opinion about this person whose lived experience you don't have, or tell these people that they're going to be happier or less happy as a result of X, Y, or Z, then in reality, when you pin them down to their own case of, okay, if your buddy, wife, whatever else, was caught in the throes of an extremely corruptive addiction, would you interfere with them? Would you tell them, hey, I know you think you're having a good time on heroin, but you're destroying your life. I'm here to help you out. Would you intervene in some way? And if they do, then you point out that this is a contradiction. You can't both say, I'm judging that your happiness is less than it could be, and then also say you shouldn't be able to judge people's happiness, because they themselves are judging people's happiness for the people that they love the most. So in doing so, let's back out and see what that does for us. All that does for us is say people who are going to be subjective about it, which, by the way, when it comes to the social issue stuff that y'all have been asking about or we've been bringing up, almost everybody on the that are proponents of kind of more what I think are labeled progressive ideas of social issues are coming from a subjectivist perspective. Almost all of them do. Not all of them, but most of them. So you have to be able to speak both as someone who understands what an objective moral set looks like and what a subjective moral set would look like. Now, of course, we do this critique of the subjective moral set in a moral argument construct itself to say that subjective morality probably doesn't work. Or I think you could say doesn't work, but you can't get everybody to agree with that necessarily. So where does this leave us? It leaves us with a tool. And the tool is a very important logical tool. And people forget this they don't forget this because they've never been taught it. You've heard me say this a million times, but we don't educate people in logic. We claim that the modern person ought to be a logical thinker. They ought to be a scientific thinker, but we don't teach them logic, which is really weird if you think about it. Like, it's not like we don't have classes in logic. Those absolutely exist. But the first time that you'll encounter one is almost certainly at the undergraduate level as a math credit. And the way that it's taught is not terribly helpful to anybody who's not looking for a math credit. Like, if you're an English major and you go to an undergraduate logic course, you're going to walk out of there with the opinion of, like, we're never doing that again. That was terrible. And yet it's the way that we all are supposed to think. So why is that? Why is it that we don't educate people in logic? I leave that as an open question, but I note that we don't. So as a result, one of the things that should be obvious to anybody is if somebody points out a contradiction in your own thinking on a particular topic and your argument for your side, then that means you're wrong. It means you're wrong. Or it means that your justification for it is wrong. You could be accidentally right, but your justification for it is certainly wrong. So finding contradictions is the absolute lethal, like there's no way that logic is right. Outside of that, a lot of the arguments that we use are not deductive arguments, they're inferential arguments. They're inferences to the best explanation. For those, it's down to probabilities, and the probability assessment is where this kind of stuff boils. The proof is in the probability statement, so to speak. For probability things, the other inconsistency that you want to point out for people is you can't say this is a very highly probable event if you're making argument A, and that the same thing is a very low probability event if you're making argument B. You have to use the same measure, and you have to use the measure consistently, like no cheating, no thumb on the scale for your side. So consistency in logic, i.e. no contradictions, and consistency in evidence. You never put your thumb on the scale when it just happens to be your argument. Those two things are what people ought to use to determine whether they're right or wrong, but we don't do it all the time. In the debate on, God willing, in March that we're having here, you will see this happen. You will see the opposition use a variable standard when it comes to evidence. In fact, the person that we're debating has never defined evidence in his written work that I can find, not any kind of rigorous definition. So you can say, this is not good evidence to me. What is your definition of evidence? That kind of thing. So all that being said, here's where we are. I think that this is a general solution to all social issues, and the solution looks like this. Now that we've worked through, assume that you've gotten to this point. Now that we've worked through and understood that all human beings look at other human beings and they judge them as to, in terms of relative happiness. This guy's as happy as he can possibly be. Or if this guy did something else, like the way that he's living his life with respect to his work or his family or his friends or his finances or whatever else, he is relatively happy or unhappy compared to how he could be. So we make a relative measurement in happiness. This is how happy I think he could be. This is how happy he actually is. All of us do that, and we do it to such a degree that we're willing to interfere in other people's lives that we love in order to bring their happiness up. So maybe a more succinct way of saying it is, we admit that we ought to be in pursuit of being as happy as we can possibly be, and if we're reasonable at all, we would admit that the people that we love, we want them to be as happy as they can possibly be. So your explanation for why are you interfering in this heroin addict's life is, I want them to be happier than they are, and it is my judgment that they could be much happier than they are if they change the way they live their life. That makes sense to everybody? That's the same thing all the way through. This person is living in a homosexual lifestyle. I think they're happy, but I don't think they're as happy as they could be, and because I love them, I want them to be happier. This person's thinking about getting an abortion. They think that's going to make them happy. I think that I think they would be much happier in the long run if they did A, B, and C. This person right here, identifies as fill in the blank. I think that they would be much happier if they identified as a son or daughter of God. This person right here is living with their girlfriend. I think that they're happy, but they could be much happier if they live God's way. The Christian's argument here is always this. Here are all the different methods that you could be happy. Okay, this is course of action A, course of action B, C, this is in measures of happiness or whatever else, or assumed happiness. And that this is Timmy's opinion of what you should do. This is Sally's opinion. This is Freddie's opinion. This is Johnny's opinion. And this is Bobby's opinion. Over here is God's opinion. Now, this depends on what you think of God. But if you think that God is all-knowing and that he's all-loving, those two alone are enough to tell you this. If God is all-knowing and all-loving, he would know what would make you the happiest. Now, presumably, and here's the presumption, the orders he gives to people in terms of moral prescriptions are his orders to you about this, not I want you to obey me, but because he's all loving, which means he cares about you as much or more than he cares about himself, this is what it takes for you to be as happy as you can possibly be. I want you to be happy, therefore follow these rules. Not I want to be in charge, therefore follow these rules. That's the idea behind laws that God gives us. It's for us to be happy. It's for us to be happy. Like Jesus said, man, the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. The idea was that's a way to make you guys happy. You work 7 days a week, you're going to be miserable. Take a break once in a while, you're going to be happy. Like that's how complex that one was. I mean, there's more to it than that, of course. But the idea would be this, is the Christian is saying nothing more or less than this. I believe that there's a God that knows what makes you the happiest. I believe that he is telling us how to be happiest. I want to be happiest. I want you to be happiest. So I'm going to follow the prescription of the doctor. Like this doctor knows what it takes to cure unhappiness. I'm going to listen to the doctor. That's all the Christian is saying here.
I like it, but it seems to me like this is assuming that the purpose of this world and the purpose of God's every commandment is your maximal happiness, which we know is not the case.
Do we know it's not the case? Now, don't forget, because I'll throw a little trick in there for you.
Long term.
Yeah.
Okay.
Happiness over time.
Because I think of Jonah.
Yes,
like,
right.
He did not want to do what God was telling him to do.
But consider Jonah's two paths. Path one, God says to Jonah, go to Damascus and tell them. And Jonah gets on a boat. I guess he didn't get on a boat. He hops on a donkey. He rides up to Damascus. He preaches. He's a good-hearted guy. And so he's like, man, if this works well, God sends this message. They'll repent in sackcloth and ashes. They repent in sackcloth and ashes. He does a touchdown celebration in the town square. Everybody lifts him up on their shoulders. This is the prophet from God. They parade him around. And he goes back to Jerusalem saying, there's 200,000 people here that God has redeemed. Like, what a great thing. Or alternately, he's like, forget it, I'm not going there. God's like, throw him in the water, fish, vomit, over here. You happy now? No, I'm miserable. Okay, scorching sun, shade, back to scorching sun. Like, that's what happens when your heart's not rightly motivated. So if Jonah could have been happier, but his happiest path was getting on a donkey and riding up to Damascus.
Fair. But the point is that the purpose of this world isn't happiness.
I think it is. But I see your point is right. The immediate purpose is not immediate happiness. But again, being a marathon runner, right? Being a super pro athlete, being a great engineer, being a great computer scientist, like you got your PhD seemingly recently. Amount of joy of your PhD studies compared to other things you could have been doing, right? So some of it was low. So assume then that you did it for the long-term happiness, and now integral of the curve over time, you have a greater happiness. Now the Christian, the other point I would like to make, and this is directly brought up by Michael here. It is the case that the Christian is punting a little bit too. Like, it doesn't matter how much it sucks here, because in heaven it's going to be great, right? But it's also the case that we are happier here on this earth when we are listening to God's prescriptions as well. And the evidence I'll give you for that are Paul and Silas are in leg fetters, apparently, or something like that, in chains. They've just been beaten. They're sitting there and they're singing praises to God and they're happy. They claim to be happy. Now, how can you claim to be happy? I'll tell you that, do you think that there's a one-for-one relationship between current physical suffering and happiness? And it's an inverse relationship. So I'll tell you where the no is on that one. And I'm not a long-distance athlete, but in my Marine Force Recon days, these lunatics who are, every single one of them has got a broken something in their brain there was this one guy, his name is Dean Schultz. He is superhuman. Like, somebody needs to CT scan him and find out, is he an alien? Have they put some implant in his brain? It doesn't matter how miserable it was, this guy was happy the entire time. Always happy, always motivated, always a smile on his face. Something wrong with him, in a good way, right? Like, I wish something was wrong with all of us that way. For fun, these guys were like, hey, let's do a competition this week. It's a bunch of recon Marines, and they made up their own t-shirt. Each team made up their own t-shirts, and it was like, let's go run for hours, and then we'll go swim out to this island that you can see out there, and then there'll be a boat out, we'll take the boat out there, and then we have to turn the boat upside down, and then ride it, and then get it back in, and then we'll run some more, and then we'll go do an obstacle course, and then we'll run some more. And they were like, you want to do it? And I'm like, yeah, that sounds great. And inside I'm like, I just lied to everybody. That does not sound great. That sounds awful. And we're in the middle of this, and it was miserable. Like, the amount of physical, like, it's all in the sand, so you're running, You got sand in all your clothes. It's like there was nothing that was objectively fun. But at some point, 3 hours into that, was this weird alchemist's mix of like, okay, I've somehow pushed my way through stupid to being a tough guy, and camaraderie and whatever else. And it was actually a level of happiness that could not be had by sitting in your officer's quarters, right? And it was a higher level of happiness, but you had to go through sand, water, sweat, and hate to get there. Now, everybody who has worked hard for anything knows of something like this. And I think that God has structured the universe in such a way that there are small, easily penetrated barriers to higher levels of happiness that come with not too much effort. Like the amount of effort that it took to do that was something like 3 hours worth of effort, of like not extreme physical difficulty, just minor physical difficulty. It was just you were at it for 3 hours. Yes, sir.
Haven't been here in a while, but
Welcome back, brother. Good to see you again.
it's nice to be here. I just want to make sure I understand so you're saying there are things God wants us to do and things God doesn't want us to do, and people in general are happier if they follow God's rules and don't do the things He doesn't want us to do and do the things He does want us to do. Am I understanding your argument correctly?
Yeah, there's certainly more nuance to it than that, but if there's a core to it, that's it right there.
That's the core.
Yeah, you got it.
So then next state is, do you then impose your view on what God wants us to do or not wants to do by law on other people?
So
you have the right to then say, I think this is wrong, so I'm saying you can't do it.
before we get to the by law part, let's just ask it without the by law clause on it. Do you impose your will on other people, period? And
The answer to that's easy.
which is what?
People reach consensus on certain things like murder or pedophilia, or there are certain things people as a collective society reach a consensus on. Remember, faith and law are opposite. Law is the state is imposing, is saying,
Well,
you
let
must.
me
Faith
be a little.
is coming to God and saying, I voluntarily submit. Law is saying the collective society has decided X, Y, or Z, and you're going to follow it whether you like it or not. Faith is voluntarily submitting to God's will. So you take the abortion issue and you say, well, a 13-year-old girl was raped, but I still think she should have the baby because I know better as an 80-year-old white man that she should have an abortion. Shouldn't have an abortion. Now, other people, there's not a consensus on that. There's not a consensus on
Okay, I thought you were saying there was a consensus on everything. I was going to say no, there's not.
You're going to impose that on them.
No, I'm fine. I actually like your point. I was going to make an argument for what you said at the end, because what you said at the end is different than what you said at the beginning.
Probably.
There isn't necessarily a consensus on it. So since there's not a consensus on it,
There isn't.
so if there's not a consensus on it, what do we do?
We think certain things rise to a bad enough level that we make laws.
What some people do and some people don't. So I apparently terrified some people in the Pentagon when I was talking about this. So a lady was giving a presentation on some soldiers from another army or whatever fighting this other unit, and she kept using the term murder for these soldiers killing this other soldier. And I was like, you keep using the term murder. Why do you use the term murder instead of killed? Like, do you think it was morally wrong? And she was like, oh, I'm just using them interchangeably. I'm like, I don't know that killing and murder are considered interchangeable in a lot of jurisprudence. You know, some things you execute people for. The other ones you're like, nah, totally permissible, right? In fact, it might have been your duty to do so.
Yeah, people have different definitions.
Okay.
Well, let's get this. Jesus was very clear on divorce, other than adultery.
Yeah.
So if you had your way,
yes,
God has a law. God knows what makes us happy. God said, other than adultery, a man shall not put away his wife.
yes.
So if you had your way, you would make divorce completely illegal except for adultery.
If I had my way,
If you had your way.
yeah. If I had my way, I wouldn't make anything illegal.
You wouldn't make anything illegal.
Yeah. If I had my way, we would be living in a world where people don't need laws because they love each other so much that you never get to the point of like, I have to.
Everyone would agree on that one.
But that's what God's building here.
Yeah.
And the way He's building it, as Michael pointed out, isn't immediately. We're not there yet because, in my opinion, we're in a filtering phase. But the point that we have been making so far is, what's your justification? So forget the law part for a second. Let's just say interpersonally. When are you going to judge somebody else to the point that you're going to interfere in their life? And I would ask you, let me ask you the question, because you weren't here, we'll have a fresh answer to it. Whoever you love most in the world, you don't have to tell us who it is, but just pick whoever it is. whoever you love most in the world ends up with a heroin addiction to the point where they're like, as soon as one needle's out and they wake up, they
illegal too.
Yeah, right. But let's say that it's just a heroin. As far as we're concerned, it's the heroin addiction we're worried about here. Would you interfere in that person's life to stop them from doing that? And how would you do so?
Intervene, try to get appropriate medical people, things like that.
I mean,
I have situations like
would
that
you try to stop them physically from putting
I have a
the?
situation like that in my family now where somebody's doing something very destructive.
Okay, but I mean, I'm trying to go to the extreme version of it, right?
Yeah.
Would you stop? Would you try to even physically restrain them from putting the next dose in themselves? Would you at least come up to them and say, like, you have to stop this? I'm picking you up. I'm taking you to my house. I'll let you sleep it off.
That's not realistic hypothetical because I can't be with anybody 24/7. So the fact that I could stop them, they have the needle and they're about to put it in. Maybe I could stop them that minute, but that's not going to do any good.
Fair enough. But the point is that you would probably try to
I
even
would try at
physically
that
stop.
moment if I'm with them, but
Yeah.
an hour later I'm not with them.
Yeah, I'm not looking to blame you for somebody being a heroin addict. Okay,
yeah.
The point here is that you, in an interpersonal relationship with somebody that you love very much, would use physical force, not like physical force, but physical force to stop them from making their own choices. And if we're consistent in our thinking, then what we recognize has just happened is you have said, I believe that my judgment is better than yours. I think that you're impaired in this case, or whatever it is. I think you're too deep in the throes of heroinism. Heroinism is now a religion, I guess. Heroinism to see what you're doing to yourself, but I'm going to stop you physically from doing it. Well, you just said you would do it.
No, I would immediately, but the problem is, if someone's going to give up addiction, just like if someone's going to accept God and God's law, that has to come from inside.
I agree with you, but hold on. Wait. I'm not making the point. I'm not telling you. Hold on. I'm not telling you how to fix it. You're missing the point.
Okay.
The point I'm making is not you're going to fix this.
I'm not going to fix it by stopping them.
The point that I'm making is you were willing to judge the other person.
How about we go to suicide? That's a little.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Suicide. You're right. That's a better one. Someone's about to kill
suicide you
himself.
don't deal with tomorrow. Well, I guess you do because I could try it again.
But you're giving me things where we've reached that legal societal consensus that they're wrong and should be stopped.
But hold on. I'm not there. I'm not doing that. I'm not saying that.
Give me something different, like
I don't want to give you something
you
different.
see the 13-year-old girl who got raped.
I don't want to do
And you
something
don't let
different.
her
Hold
go.
on, let me finish the point. Can I finish the point? Let me finish the point. I don't want to make any of those arguments because I've already got the point out there. The point out there is that one human being who thinks himself doing the right thing, and by the way, I agree with you that you're doing the right thing on this, is looking at another human being and saying, my judgment is better than yours in this case, and I'm going to interfere and stop you from doing this stuff. Now, we all admit, like, can we stop the determined suicidal person from killing themselves? Not in the long run. Can we stop the determined heroin addict from being
Not that you
addicted?
can get them committed.
Right, and even so, that may just be for a time, and then they get out and they do it again. Right, so I'm not saying this is how you fix it. Not saying this is how you fix it. What I'm saying is you would make the
The
judgment.
immediate emotional reaction for
The
someone.
reason I'm making the judgment point is that almost all people who take the subjective perspective here, who say things like, who are you to judge the trans person? Who are you to judge the person of a different cultural background? Who are you to judge the LGBTQ plus person? Who are you to judge fill in the blank? The answer is, I am the same person, back to that person, you yourself judge all the time. You will be willing to judge in these cases. The difference between people who are typically on this side and the Christian is the Christian says all of these things that I just listed are things that make you less happy than you could be. Whereas the person in the subjective modern world says, no, being LGBTQ makes you more happy than you would otherwise be. So there's a disagreement on what causes you to be happy. But both sides agree in the extreme case, and therefore in principle, that, and not just the edge cases, but like you can walk that to a number of different things. They both of them agree that yes, you do sit in judgment of other people's motives and life choices. So if you can't turn around and say you can't judge other people's life choices, if you yourself admit you would judge other people's life choices, that's the only point I was trying to make here.
So if you were walking by a maternity room and the woman was going to die unless she terminated the pregnancy, you would intervene to not let them terminate and let her.
I don't know why you think I would do that.
I'm asking.
Oh, okay.
Because you morally think it's always wrong in every situation.
No, I think that if it's mother or baby, I think if the question, I don't
I mean,
know.
a lot of people who advocate that would do that.
Maybe so, but
I don't know your personal.
well, let's say that my personal one is irrelevant. My personal one was in the choice of the wife or the woman or the baby. That if somebody's going to die, you have to pick.
Right.
Right. And I think that the person who gets,
Pick, or
in
does
my
the
opinion, the person who gets to pick that is the mother. Right? It's her life
So she picks.
because the baby can't pick. So it's her life. So if she chooses to die, that's her right. If she
Right.
chooses to like, hey, and if she's out, then it's whoever the next
And
responsible
there are, of
person
course,
is.
those in that debate who would say she doesn't get to pick, she has to die.
Maybe so. But my point is, what's the justification? I agree that people may disagree on it, but what's the justification there?
And that's the point where there isn't a consensus, which is why you have to leave it up to the individual when there's not a consensus.
No, you don't leave it up to the individual when there's not a consensus. That's the point.
You and I disagree on that.
No, but what I'm saying is the individual themselves wouldn't say you leave it up to the individual. Right? The same individual who says this is my body, my choice, is also the same individual that would say, yes, I would stop my friend from killing themselves. Who's also the same individual that would say, I would stop. So they themselves agree that if person X, whoever we're saying, who's about to do action Y, if person X is about to do action Y and your judgment is making the wrong choice, you might interfere in doing so. So they can't turn around and say my body, my choice in all cases if they're also going to say I stop people from killing themselves or I would rescue my friend who's in the throes of heavy addiction. They're inconsistent logically by doing so. That's the only point I'm making here. Now that ought to be more impactful to us than it is. But why isn't it? Answer is we're not trained in logic. This is the same reason that we're insensitive when it comes to love, by the way. Everybody in the world agrees that the greatest thing in the world is love, right? There's nobody that disagrees with that. Number of classes that we have in love, first 12 years of education, 0. Ask the average person on the street to define love, they can't do it. Ask the average person in here, in this sanctuary of a bunch of Christians to define love, you'll get 3 Greek words, and when you're like, no, I'm just looking for a one sentence that defines love as a concept, not that it's different expressions. You'll get, and a bunch of bad answers. And that's not the fault necessarily of the people in here, because we are all told that we're well educated by the time we get done here in America, in high school, right? And it's not true, because we don't know a daggum thing about logic, we don't know a daggum thing about love, and we actually know very little about personal habits unless you've been forced into a home ec or shop class. So like, I got it. Good job on, forgive me for ranting here. Can I rant for a second? I'm glad that you can make a good critique of 18th century English literature, but I don't know how to mow my lawn or change a tire. Stopped and helped a guy change a tire the other day. A guy change a tire. Okay. Man, you got me all excited.
I like to muddy the water a little bit. When you think about the law of the diminishing middle, if you accept the fact that, yes, I should intervene.
Okay.
If I accept that fact, well, at what point do I intervene? And we've talked about the extreme edge where suicide or heroin, or there's going to be an immediate harm.
Yeah.
Well, what about a slow long-term harm? I've lived through smoking. My wife considers eating sugar very detrimental to me and my health in the long run.
Yes, yeah.
Yet I love dessert. I've never met one I didn't like.
Yes.
I even brought up the fact that at a previous church where they were big on anti-abortion and all the hot buttons for evangelicals, but yet when they had their church suppers, they had sweet tea. And I brought up the fact that, hey, why don't you serve unsweetened tea? Because that sugar's killing them. And they looked at me like I was a heretic.
Well, if you said that in the Southern Baptist Church, you are a heretic.
I did.
I don't know if you know it, but yeah. There's a test for it, which is you stir it, and if the spoon stays up when you let go, it's done.
At what point do you or should you intervene? And that's a question I think we're all wrestling with.
The point that he made is really is highly relevant.
Talking about suicide.
This is very relevant, the point that he made, which is basic. He made a couple points in there that were worth studying. But one of them has to do with what's going to be effective, right? Not did this person, were they inconsistent? Let's say that because you're a pragmatist, you're like, I don't care if you're inconsistent. The bottom line is you're ineffective. Okay, let's say that you take that. I'm not saying he took that stance, but let's say that you even take that hard pragmatic stance of it doesn't matter if you can't actually stop the person from killing themselves. Great, you stopped them from this time. They're just going to go right back to it next week. How do you be most effective at convincing the person that your interference in their life, it ought to be not only unwillfully submitted to initially, but in the long run accepted? And the easiest way to answer that question, in my opinion, is it's an earned right. So ideally, you have become so important in this person's life that they come to you for advice. So that when you come to them and say, you didn't ask for my advice today, but I'm telling you, you're killing yourself with this. That they're forced to consider it because you've already earned your place in their life. In short, if you love somebody and you so much that you care whether they stop doing heroin and kill themselves, presumably you should have loved them enough to care about them before they got to the point where they were huge heroin addicts, right? Ideally, you stopped them in the first place. And the way to do that, that's not practical all the time, right? You're going to encounter people in your life who have gone through horrible things, or maybe you just learned about them, and now you're dealing with it at that point. So I'm not saying that it always works that way, but the point is this: if you love them so much that they're forced to listen to you, you're more likely to be effective than you are if you're just a person with a poster out there that's like, you're killing your baby. You know what I mean? The best way to get a mother to, you brought, I think, one of the abortion things up a while ago, in terms of mental health. The best way to get a mother not to abort her baby is not to stop her on the sidewalk on the way into the clinic. The best way is that you're such a friend to her that you have convinced her, A, it's bad for her mental health if she does it, B, it's not good for her spiritually if she does it, and C, you are, for all intents and purposes, going to figure out how to take that baby and get it into a place, if she can't or won't do it, into a place where that baby is living the best life that it possibly can. So that it's easy for her to make the right decision. If saving a baby's life is the right decision, I believe it is the right decision, because I think that life is not a gift. Like, everybody's like, life's a gift. False. Life is a gift to those who are happy. Life's a burden to people who are not happy. Life is a stewardship. God gives you life to do something with it. Now, it's both a gift so when I said false, it is both a gift and a stewardship. You can't just take it and say, it's mine, I'm going to do whatever I want with it. You owe the people around you, because God says you do, because he put you, if he wanted only one person, he would have only made one person. He wanted lots, which means you've got a responsibility to your brother and sisters.
To those who are called.
To all. They've all got the responsibility. Not everybody picks their responsibility up. So that's my point there. Seth on that.
I think some people might say they're subjective, but in actuality, they're a third option, which is just like a nihilist, where it's when they say you should not do that, it means you should not do that because I don't like it, and enough people that I like also don't like it, and I also do this other thing because I want to, or because I like to do it. So it's not, but it's subjective. It's like implied of like the moral, like right and wrong, like rises about from a bunch of people deciding, and nihilist is like there is no right and wrong, and people just do what they want to.
So I think it's an interesting question as to whether all subjective moralities require epiphenomenal rising of some subjective values. I think they all do at some point, otherwise they wouldn't be subjective. But I echo what you described by the person was subjective morality. Now, if you turn around and said it's not subjective morality because there's no morality.
But their consistency isn't in their, like subjectively they're creating a principle, and then that principle determines other situations. The principle is I do what I want in that situation.
But that is immoral. So the question, what is immoral? What is immoral?
Right, but they can't say that it's wrong for you to prevent me from doing
amoral?
that.
A-space moral?
What is A-space moral?
A-space moral.
Yes. What is A-space moral?
Oh, sorry, I was just looking for the clarification.
No, you made the clarification, now you gotta answer the question, right?
But, I think amoral is justification that someone ought to do or ought not to do.
Yes.
It's that they're objective. That's where subjective morality is essentially no morality. It's just I prefer instead of you truly ought.
But why does ought exist?
Well, it only exists
in that situation. It's a word to get other people to do what you want. It's just a manipulation word.
Okay.
Oughts don't actually exist.
So then, would you say this one? Everybody in that case, would you want to phrase it which of these two ways? Everybody ought to act in their own interest. I'm just clever enough to get other people to act in my interest. Or is it there is no ought at all? Everybody only does what they can or can't do.
The second
Okay, so this is, in my mind, this is the belief that this is a worldview, nihilist or whatever else, that says there are no morals. There's only what a man can do and a man can't do, or a woman can do or what they can't do. So there, if you say what ought to be done, the answer is there are no oughts, because there's no moral grounding for any moral prescription that says this is a law, therefore do it. Now, what's the problem with that? Is there any problem with that?
You end up with survival of the fit. I mean, you end up with he was the biggest gun that's in charge of everyone.
Okay, but maybe that works out well because now your toughest, most likely to survive people are in charge, and that's in the long run. Okay, so what?
Not everyone who's most likely to survive is most likely to do what's right.
The best organized group wins.
Wins what, though?
What all of history is.
But wins what? Like in that worldview, in a nihilist worldview, in one world, the Earth, human species survives for another, 100 million years, and then goes and populates the rest of the universe, and the universe is full of these people. In another world, we all die in the next 15 minutes because we nuke each other. So what?
Right. Yeah, it's untenable.
Well, but who cares? The point is, who cares?
Yeah, for sure.
Like, there's nothing better between the human species survives and everybody dies.
Who cares is whatever group can organize.
So, what's the problem with the who cares belief system?
You care.
Because you care. So you say, not you, the nihilist says, who cares? Whatever I want to do is what I can do. Then you turn around and say, okay, that's the way you want to act. And they're like, yeah, that's the way I want to act. And like, okay, well, here's this person, and they're stronger than you, and they're going to, not only are they going to kill you, they're going to just pin you up in their basement, hang you upside down, and torture you for the next 3 years.
Yeah,
do you care now?
But it's untenable.
They'll turn around and say they do care at that point. Or if they say they don't care after 4 months of being tortured, I bet they care.
They act in accordance with what they care about.
Say it again.
If it's they act in accordance with what they want to do, like they would say, okay, I try to prevent that from happening.
Yeah, but
if I can't, then I can't.
Okay, and if they're willing to accept that, and then I would say the following thing: do you think that that's the world, just selfishly, nihilists? So now we're talking to the nihilists, and we're only talking selfishly. And we say, what's the best way? Like, let's say that you want to live in a world selfishly. You're just like, I want to maximize my happiness. Well, let me ask the nihilist here, since you're playing the nihilist. Do you want to be happy? Mm-hmm. So now, what's the best way to be happy?
If I can sit at the top of the hierarchy, and everyone else believes that it's morally wrong to unseat.
Why do you believe that sitting at the top of the hierarchy is going to make you happier than being somewhere else in the hierarchy?
Because I can command more resources and avoid work.
But the scientific data don't indicate that the people at the top of the hierarchy are the happiest people. You said you're interested in being happy, but now you're telling me I want to be at the top of the hierarchy. Those are not the same thing. The data, in fact, indicate very differently.
It's like, well, I disagree with that.
They may disagree, but saying I disagree is not winning an argument. Saying I disagree simply might mean I'm mistaken in my argument and I don't know how to answer back. So it's both the case that they're saying.
I'm a unique individual, and I might have to try out being at the top of the hierarchy to see if I like it or not.
Which is what everybody thinks, right? That's what they all think. And then you get to the top and you're like, is this it? Tom Brady, right? Stood there twice. The first time he stood up there, did a 60 Minutes interview back in 2000 something earlier, and was like, I won 3 Super Bowls, is it? And I remember saying to myself, is this it? Is this really all there is? And then he forgot that he said that. He went on, did his thing, and was like, family, who cares about that? I'm over critiquing poor Tom Brady. And then now he retired again, right? So he got to the top, forgot that he didn't like it, chased it again, still didn't fulfill it. And this happens all the time, right? The data are not that the people who are at the top of the hierarchies are the happiest people. In fact, some of them are the most miserable people you've ever met in your life.
That's a classic Stephen Covey quote. He says, what happens when you get to the top of the ladder and you find out your ladder's been on the wrong wall?
Yeah, right. Yeah, that's a great way of putting it.
So with these, with heroin addiction and abortion and suicide, I think we can all arrive at an objective, what would be the right thing, what would be the best thing, but the question always comes to here and now, what do I do? Because the answer isn't always the same.
Okay.
And so even though we arrive at these objective truths, we're pretty sure we arrive at these objective truths, every day where we live is so subjective because we have to decide if in this case, in these, heroic possibilities of intervention, is today the day? Is now the time for me to act? And it may never be the time for you to act. So there's always this, as a believer,
Yes.
there's always this, and if it is the time to act, there's a host of possible actions to take.
Yes. And let's compound the problem by saying things like, we are wrong as a human being, as a species, so frequently that you're like, man, whatever I think is the right thing to do here is probably going to end up being wrong in the long run. So what am I supposed to do? And I would say this is where, here, let me recommend the ethic for it. If what you say is something like this, the correct ethic, how are we going to act in this case? So here you are presented with some difficult situation. You're like, what am I going to do? If what you did was say, okay, let me get out my chess pieces and mastermind, kit, and we're going to sit here and think through all the different things. I'll tell you what we'll do. We'll game theory this one. He could do this. He could do that. She could do this. She could do that. These are all the different ways. If I act this way, then this will happen. If I act this way, that'll happen. And next thing you know, a plane comes in and crashes and changes your whole calculus and you didn't see it coming and all that kind of stuff, right? So it's a very complex problem, and we're not terribly good at forecasting the way complex systems interact, especially ones that have human beings in the loop. So now you throw up your hands and you're like, I just quit. So here's another way of doing it is, how about this? How about if all you did was say, I don't know what to do here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put myself in the other person's shoes and say, if I was Sally in this case, what would I want me to do? What would I want what would I wish, how would I wish I was being treated? Right? This ethic should sound familiar. If all you did was act out of love, out of putting yourself in the other person's shoes, out of doing to other people what you would have them do to you, if it turns out that you're wrong, what happens? Everybody instantly forgives you. And the other person probably is grateful that, wow, you really tubed that, but thank you. I understand why you did it. I appreciate it. So, and that ends up covering a lot of difficulty. If you are acting out of some other thing where you are forcing it on somebody else and it doesn't work out, turns out that what you were trying to force out of them turns out to be difficult, more difficult or harder or worse, then now people are going to go to war with you, right? So it turns out that the ethic of love works even for the nihilist, because if the nihilist is interested in their own happiness, as it turns out, if you could show the nihilist, and you can try this with history, but people love doing the thing in history where they're like, well, that wasn't really how it should have worked in history. If I'd have been in charge, it would have turned out better, right? That's what everybody says. So if they can't get them in history, if you could fast forward their lives and you showed them one life where they acted completely selfishly and only were after what they wanted, and another life where they act lovingly and, by the way, managed to find a group of people that acted lovingly and treated them lovingly, that in 20 years, 40 years, 60 years, they would be happier in the loving environment than they would be in the dog-eat-dog environment. That would turn out to be true in almost every case, and arguably every case. It's almost every case in a secular calculus. If you've got a God at the back of it who makes a promise that says, I'll work all things together for good to those that love me and are called according to my purpose, then you don't have to worry about it, because where you screw it up, God's like, no problem, I got it covered, and he intervenes. Either preemptively he had done so or miraculously he does so. So this is the answer to the nihilist, which is we have to do it in terms of your own happiness. And in terms of your own happiness, you ought to, if you're being self-consistent, if you're being consistent, you ought to adopt an ethic of love, which means that you would act differently than you do right now. Yes, sir.
I was just going to say that it was mentioned earlier that life gets subjective essentially when the decision matrix gets difficult and hard to calculate. But that's a misunderstanding of subjective.
Yes.
In that even if you don't know the call, right? Like you meet someone and you're like, oh, do I intervene? He's, I can't tell if this man is abusive to his son or if he's, like being hard on him because like the father truly knows best. Like his wife says, no, he's not abusive to his son, but the grandmother says, whatever, my pastor's telling me this other pastor's telling me, doesn't matter how complicated the moral decision is, that doesn't make it subjective, in that if God was in the room, God could tell you this is the right answer, right? So not being able to see the right answer.
Believers, he is in the room.
He is,
right,
yes.
yeah. This is what, by the way, I don't know whether this was good, but I used to do this to the youth over here when I thought they were getting a little too cocky. I would give them a little stunner. I'd be like, you guys actually don't believe that God exists. And the boys would be like, what are you talking about? I'm like, you don't believe God exists? And they're like, yeah, we do. I'm like, all right, let me ask you a question. probability. So you're in your house, your dad's standing right next to you, you're on the laptop in your room, and he's right next to you. What's the chances that you're going to look at pornography? He goes like 0% chance. I'm like, why? I was like, your dad going to beat you? They're like, no, I'd just be ashamed that I would even be looking at that stuff in front of him because he knows it's wrong. I know it's wrong. He'd watch me, right? Okay. What is the probability that nobody's in your house, nobody's tracking it? In fact, you're in some place where tracking it isn't even possible. What are the chances? And you're alone with that laptop for 3 days. What's the chances you're going to look at pornography? And they won't answer the question, but half of them blush and don't look you in the eye. And the answer is like something greater than 0. I'm like, greater than the other. And they're like, yeah. I'm like, okay. If Jesus was standing right next to you, would you do it? And they're like, no, absolutely not. I'm like, but you're a Christian, and Christians believe that God is everywhere and sees everything. So if you believed God were in the room with you, you would react the exact same way you would if Jesus were physically in the room with you or if your dad's in the room with you. The fact that you don't means that you don't actually believe that God is everywhere, or that you need to, or that you would be embarrassed in front of him, or that you need to impress him, or you want to impress him, or whatever else. That's the difference between belief and thought. And they're like now I've destroyed their entire belief system. I'm like, hang on, let me explain why there's a difference. And then I start to explain what the practical difference is between them. But to your point, yeah, if we were completely consistent Christians, we would be acting all the time like God is sitting in that chair right there. Like Jesus is right there.
That as I pray and seek wisdom, he's granting that wisdom to manage this situation that faces me at the moment. I don't know how anyone parents
Without that assumption?
without that. I mean, gosh.
Well, let's say it this way. A lot of people parent because they think it's the right thing to do, but they don't have that as a resource. Because they don't either believe that or know that, or they haven't realized that. So they're trying to do the best they can, possibly. But it just doesn't work out as well.
I just know what the best I can do, even schmuck.
She had a difficult child.
I don't know who that was, but my condolences to you, I'm sure.
I'd like to throw a question out. From a Christian point of view, could you say that subjective morality is what the Bible would describe desires of the flesh?
No. I think people will try to take desires of the flesh and make them subjective oughts. And so that subjective morality that they, or as a group or an individual, have decided upon, they will use that, maybe I'll say, as an excuse or as a justification. I value this, therefore it's the right thing to do. In the long run, though, when you pin them down, do they really value that? And this is where love and other people matter.
Well, the Bible speaks of desires of the flesh and the desires of the spirit.
Yeah, but those could also be
with
seen.
Respect to making choices. And can you say that objective morality, without the interjection of the desires of the spirit, you can't have objective morality?
So I'm a little reluctant to open this can of worms. I believe differently than a lot of people do in the church on what that means. So in my opinion, the desires of the flesh are all God-given. So, and it depends on what you mean by flesh, but I mean like my body's urges, these are given by God. These are not given by the devil. Because the devil didn't build my body. God built my body. So when I am hungry, and the fact that I'm hungry, that's not an evil desire. It's a desire of the flesh, in that my flesh desires to eat, but that's not evil.
So
when a desire to drink, when a desire to sleep.
There's a lot of things embedded in it, a lot of assumptions embedded in it.
But what
you've redefined the biblical term.
Right. Well,
if you're going to do that.
Have I, or have other theologians taken flesh to mean something else?
I think you've redefined it because biblically.
What's the Greek word?
Doesn't matter.
Yeah, we're talking about definitions. So if you don't even know what the word is, we can't say that I missed it.
Do you know what the Greek word is?
Before we dive into this argument on what the desires of the flesh is, I think it's really important that we first get a firm understanding.
For the record, I said I don't want to dive into this. So let's undive from it. We'll do that at another time.
It's not an answer my humanism question from the last time.
I did punt on you. Actually, I told you to ask that in this class, didn't I? So ask that when he's done with his point.
It's not a right versus wrong. So objective versus subjective. Mm-hmm. It's one of those things. It's like a metaphysical, like either morality is objective or it is subjective. Your opinion on it doesn't matter.
Well, here's the reason I brought that. I was trying to make this point.
What?
In the way that he brought it up, assuming what Mark's talking about, you can broadly take desires of the spirit to be good and desires of the flesh to be evil. Mm-hmm. I'm saying that I don't think that's correct.
No, I understand. But that's separate from objective versus subjective.
But I want to be clear.
moral.
So lest anybody think that I'm some wild-eyed heretic. I think that the desires of the flesh would be good if we were in the garden. I think the desires of the flesh, given that we all live in a world where man was like, forget it, God, I'm in charge, that the desires of the flesh, that the initial, immediate desire of the flesh will likely take you towards something that is evil.
So
I just want to be clear about that.
And I was saying in context, I don't think you need to know the Greek word to evaluate what it means in context. And
Fair,
I think
fair enough.
Are
you comfortable with what I just said?
The discussion in the garden is a perfect example. The woman she saw that it was good for the taking, and then she took. That is the classic example of the desires of the flesh, and yet it was wrong.
But why was it wrong?
It was evil because it was not trusting the Lord, and she decided to do what she wanted to do instead of what
Right, that's the reason it was evil. But the desire of the flesh, so let me ask you.
Well, that's how it's described.
But hold on, let me ask you this question. It says Eve
I
saw.
agree with you otherwise.
Eve saw that the fruit
But I'm just stating
was
that
desirable
I think
for
you're
two reasons.
fine.
What were the two reasons that the fruit was desirable according to?
Knowledge.
For the
It looked
gaining of
desirable for you.
wisdom, and the other one was
To be like that.
for food.
Oh, yeah.
Like it looked like it was good food.
Yeah, so it was.
Okay. The fact that God made it look like good food, does that mean that He's tempting Eve?
Yeah, but so we're talking about two different things.
I agree, and that's the point that I'm
Yeah,
trying.
and what I'm trying to say is, if you're going to treat that definition that way, you have to really say, this is the way I'm defining it, which is not biblically the way it would be used in the Old Testament or the New Testament.
But a part of a longer discussion, Michael, rescue us from ourselves here.
C.S. Lewis might agree with you in the sense that he said that most desires are not inherently bad. It's twisted desires back to the wrong purposes, desires taken into excess in directions that they shouldn't be.
That's what I believe, and Lewis says it better than I ever would. So
Yeah,
take
I
Lewis's
completely
word.
agree with that.
Yeah. Okay. Good.
My
We've all cited
my only
St.
flaw
Louis, St. Clyde Lewis.
You're using
We're all good.
a term that was defined differently.
All right. Then are we back to your point? Because I interrupted you.
So objective, right? We know there has to be objective reality and truth. The question that just means like when someone says Jupiter exists, right? The planet Jupiter exists. No one goes, well, that's a subjective question. Jupiter exists to me, but it doesn't exist to you, right? That just doesn't make sense. So objective means like there
Exists in reality.
Yeah, there is a firm like yes or no. It's essentially a binary yes or no with regards to what actually is.
Agreed. And I don't. He's right. We'll grant that. That is a assumption that we're making here. So we've had this discussion, by the way, previously in this class for months.
Right.
So let's not rehash that one. Here's my point, and this is a question that I want to ask you. My solution, my generalized answer to every social justice, every social issue is the same. I want person A to be happy. I judge that person A is not as happy as they could possibly be. I'm merely advocating for person A to adopt a course of action that will make them the happiest, according to my judgment. Then the person says, how dare you, and you take them through the same thing that we did. And then the person says, well, your judgment's not right, and you take them through the other thing that we said about God being an engineer that knows it all and all that other kind of stuff. And so I've got a logically solid case for why I have an opinion about all these social issues. Now, here's where I'm going to run into trouble. If I say to the person, if I am protesting an abortion clinic, and the only thing that I ever do is to hold up a sign that says, if you kill your baby, you're going to hell. If that's the only thing that I do, and I'm on the opposite side, my argument immediately back would be this. If you want the person to be happy, then why are you adopting the course of action that makes you feel good, but doesn't help the person make their decision? Don't you say you love the person, where are you in their life? Why didn't you go to their neighborhood and find out the people who are in trouble and assist them before this became an issue? In short, if you really love these people that you claim that you're saving the babies, why not go help them in the first place? And that critique is a pretty darn good one. And I challenge any Christian to come up with a good response to that one other than, well, God says so. Unless God sent you to be the prophet who goes and does that, his orders to you are love these people. Go find the sick, the poor, the naked, the hungry, and feed, clothe, visit, all those other things. Do those things. The rest of us will flow out of that.
Like, when people say, like, why can't we judge? It's like, because that's what God wants us, but then he judges others, so it's kind of like, to me, it feels very hypocritical.
It feels very...
Hypocritical?
Yes.
Like, he judges people and not to, and then he does the same.
You mean that God's hypocritical by saying, "Judge not, lest you be judged," and then God judges?
Yeah, like it just doesn't. To me, it doesn't like make sense, and it's just like how to change that thought process.
Yeah. So to that, it doesn't make sense portion of it, in my understanding, what Jesus is saying there, the people Jesus was talking to at the time would have believed the following thing: God is the righteous judge of all the earth, and whatever he says is probably the right thing. They wouldn't have said probably. It's certainly the right thing. Okay. Jesus turns around and says, "Hey, Scott and Michael and Seth, you guys are running around with your we're pastors or shepherds of some sort. We're elders or bishops or pastors or Christians of some sort, and you're judging people in my name. Like, so you're saying, oh, you're doing the wrong thing. God says you should do this, and you're wrong, and I'm going to judge you for it and I'm judging according to God's law." What Jesus was saying is to those people, to us, be careful, because however you judge your fellow man, that's how God's going to judge you. And he tells 3 or 4 parables exactly like this. The most well-known of them is there once was a rich landowner king that had a dude that owed him millions of dollars. And he brings the guy in. He's like, "You owe me millions, pay it back." And the guy's like, I don't have it. And he's like, "All right, sell him and his family until he pays it all back." And the guy falls on his knees and begs the king, "Please give me time and I will pay it all back." And the king has mercy on him and says, "You know what? I wiped the whole thing away. You're forgiven the entire debt." He then walks out and finds a guy that owes him a few tens of thousands of dollars and says, "Pay back what you owe." And the guy's like, "Be patient with me, I'll pay it all back." And he throws him in jail and doesn't have mercy on him. The king hears about it, drags this guy back in and says, "I forgave you of millions. You didn't forgive this guy." And he throws him out to the jailers and says, "Keep him there until he pays it all back." That's what "judge not lest you be judged" is about. It's about, by all means, judge if you want to, but the standard God's going to use to judge you is the same one that you're meting out to other people. So be careful which one you use there, tough guy, because that's the way God's going to judge you. That's what "judge not lest you be judged" meant. Doesn't mean put your brain off to the side, don't think about it anymore. Absolutely do so. What it's saying is do what we're saying to do here. Be consistent and loving when you do so.
Subject yourself to the same standard that.
Yeah, don't be a hypocrite. That's the point.
Well, it was just like kind of screwing up my mind.
Yeah. No, immediately on its face, it does seem to be a contradiction. But if you walk back through it, that's I think is what's getting said. Yeah, I think you're right. That's a good point.
Yeah, when I oftentimes think about it, right, like when you ask, like, well, why does God have a right to judge us? God is so beyond us intellectually, in truly every capacity, right? We look at dogs and we go, you know what? I have the right to judge your behavior. If you have 2 or 3 dogs, right, and those dogs start killing each other, you immediately step in and say, this is wrong. You're not, like, you don't have the authority to look at the other dogs and say, like, I'm in charge of you. You have to do what I say now, right? Like, so we recognize with lower life forms, like, no. There are times where my job is to step in and be like, I'm exerting my will over you. I'm in a place of judgment over you. You are not fit to judge each other on this issue. Right? It's the same thing with God. He looks at us, right, and like, yeah, we feel like we're big, smart.
If it was anybody other than you, I would bomb throw in this a little bit. I get your point. I would quibble with it initially to say, like, oh, so do you think people whose IQ are 2 or 3 standard deviations higher than the others should be allowed to judge the lower IQ people because they're that much smarter?
There are situations where I think that some people do best and ought to be ruled over by another person for their benefit as heck.
I'm not going down this rabbit hole yet.
Yeah,
Okay.
You're just having fun, man.
Yeah, I am. So let's. I'll take the point under advisement for now, but we'll see.
That from his mother.
Yeah.
Learned it from Aristotle.
Yeah. What I wanted to walk away with was this is a generalized solution to the problem, but it requires you to be non-hypocritical. It requires you to be loving in order to consistently answer it. So I think it's a good answer, but it's an answer that calls for, I think it's the right answer. I think it's provably the right answer, and hopefully we showed the proof of that here, the arguments for it. But it requires you, on pain of hypocrisy, to be loving to your fellow man. So you have to be careful using it.
I'm sorry, but I think that it's incomplete because this doesn't account for, like, a fellow from church we used to go to was driving home from work one day.
Yeah.
He's going over the overpass from Route 7 to Route 7, because that's the way that our
Yes.
in Leesburg, right? It's super weird. It's super high. Guy was about to jump off.
Yeah.
And kill himself.
Yes.
Total stranger.
Yes.
And the guy from our church immediately pulls over, runs out, grabs the guy, and pulls him off the ledge.
Yes.
Right? Now, sure, you can say, yeah, he was being loving, but he certainly doesn't meet the criteria of you have loved this person and earned the right to do so by being a part of his life and being a trusted person.
Yeah, so if you think this, what I'm saying is until you have earned your life, the right to be a part of that person's life, then you cannot act in their life. I'm not saying that. What I am saying is if it's the case that you have to be consistent, but as an example, that is thinking of other people as you would have them do to you. And here's how I would do it. I would drive past that one, and I wouldn't do it this way, but here's what the good justification would look like. I'm driving past this person, he's about to jump, and I think to myself, God forbid, what if my sons or daughter got to this place in their life and they're about to end their life? Would I want a stranger to grab them, and stop them? And the answer would be yes to that one. So, I'm still acting in accordance with love. The difference is I'm trying to be specific as to different methods that people use. The kind of people who only want to act from a distance are being logically inconsistent with their ethic of love.
Right.
Act from a distance are people who, like, I'm not saying don't protest abortion clinics. I think there's space for that. But I think if you're going to do one, you ought to do the other.
Right. Well, so I guess my problem with this as justification for helping the heroin addict is it's essentially just saying, is what you're doing out of love for the person? If yes, then yes. If no, then no. And that's
what do you mean if no? What do you mean if no, then no?
If what you're doing is not out of love for the person, then don't do it.
I didn't say that.
Okay.
What I'm saying is the person who says you ought not do this is the same person who would in fact do that themselves. That was the point I was making with the heroin addict. I was not prescribing. I was saying this is how you identify consummation.
Right, but then you gave a justification for why it's okay to exert your will as long as it's out of love. And that's where I'm saying that it's essentially like Kant's
categorical,
yeah, that's great and all, but it doesn't actually help you in any specifics. It doesn't help you when you're sitting there wondering, what is the loving thing to do in this situation, right? Like, there are plenty of times where we genuinely love someone and we sit there questioning, how do I love this
Great.
person?
Give me the hardest version of these. Give me the hardest question. Give me the hardest one. Let's work through it.
Hardest one. Honestly, I think some of the hard ones are minor. Some of the hard ones to make a decision it's a moral issue in the person's life. Say they've got a lot going on, right? Like my housemate, he in law school, super stressed out, starts doing some stuff that's mildly self-destructive, right? At what point do you go in and go, you're doing this to yourself, and this is bad for you, we're going to have an intervention, right? At what point is that the right thing to do? At what point is it not the right thing to do? So we sit there, I sit there and I go, well, he's only going to be doing this for a few months. Is it going to become a habit afterwards? Is it not going to become a habit, afterwards? Is this something like truly bad enough that I've already talked to him? Like, is this something truly destructive enough that really merits me overriding his free will, or not? Because there are times where God, in love, over seemingly says like, you can go this far, no farther. Like with Gomer. Right when he's like, I will hedge you in with thorns.
I missed the point. He's got a lot going on in his life, and what's the problem?
And he starts doing something self-destructive.
Okay. It's
right.
very generic.
And you talk to him, and you're like, "This is a problem."
You've gone very easy on me for presenting the hardest possible problem. This is nowhere near the hardest problem.
No, I don't think that the hardest problem is the hard. Like, it's super easy with suicide.
Okay.
It's super easy with heroin. Like, at least for me, it's like, yeah, they're doing that. That's where I recognize there comes a point where I ought to override their choice physically restrain them and stop them. And I don't think it's based on the law. Because if I live in Nazi Germany and someone's coming to kill, right? A German is coming to kill a Jew. I go, no, that's wrong. I will hide this person.
I'll give you an easy, harder one off the top of my head.
Sure.
You're a cop. You come home. The son that you love and the other son that you love very much have somehow gotten into an altercation. They're both armed, and one of them is pointing the gun at the other one and says, "I'm going to kill you in 3 seconds. 2, 1. Now what do you do?" How about that's a harder one? Okay. So the bottom line, though, is we'll punt that one until next time, because I want that one want to work through fairly rigorously and not give a flip answer to it. But I'm telling you that I think that the ethic of love works there, and the reason that God gave us particular laws of different types is just in the case that we're so confounded that we are confused about what would actually be the healthiest and happiest and best thing to do. Is that we're like, man, I can't even think through this, but I know God says X, so let me start with that, and then in love, I will assume that that's the generally the best thing to do here, and I'll work from there. I think that's why God bothered to give us laws.
Like, in my opinion, for like the heroin and like abortion, like I would ask the person, like, can I talk to you if you're mentally stable enough?
Yeah.
And then put my 2 cents in and let them decide.
Yeah, that's a great point. There's no point making outstanding moral and ethical arguments to somebody who is so doped up on heroin that they're not hearing you, right? Or that mentally that they're in a place where you identify, you're like, I know they're hearing me, but there's no way, I know they're listening to me, but there's no way they're truly hearing what I'm saying. You're right. This is where I think the love thing comes in. It's a halfway answer to what you were saying. The person who's got a lot going on and all other stuff, maybe the right answer is the same thing that I do with my 3-year-old when he gets upset. Because you look at him in the situation, he's in a loop, his sister told him to do something else, the toy is broken, here's this whole thing, and the answer, there's so many good moral ways to deal with it. Of like, hey, let's talk about how your sister could do, how do you want your sister to treat you here? Hey, look, I can fix this toy, we can do these other things. You know what the right answer is with the 3-year-old? Look, hey, look over here. Look, have you seen this thing? Here's a new thing. And he will literally go from like crying to like instantly, like somebody dialed him and switched him. And you're like, his amygdala just let go of him. I don't know what happened there, but like for that guy, that was the solution. Now, once he's out of that, then you can reattack and come back in and be like, okay, when you're dealing with your sister and the toy isn't working, how about we do this? And he's like, okay. And you're like, that was super easy, but the pathway to it was through this other thing. For the heroin addict who's, in the throes and they're, finally coming out, the answer might be, instead of leaving them in their home again, might be like, hey, let's go have a sandwich. It's on me. And you pull them out of that. Yes. So that helps you walk with them on the path. In short, if you got somebody who's crippled, the best thing you can do is put your arm around them, let them put their weight on you and start walking. Because by the time that they realize that you're walking them in your path, it might be too late for them to continue to make the bad decision. All right, we are out of time, and I told the next class that I'd make sure that we get out of here in time. Great discussion. I would love to continue this if you want to, but we're sort of nearing the end-ish of this topic, potentially in solid ground terms. So if anybody's got anything else they want to do, bring it up for next time. 2 quick admin answers. Debate's supposedly still on for next month. Also, the church has come to us in an ETS kind of format. ETS kind of format, and asked if this fall we wouldn't start a kind of like a series on the resurrection and like a minimal fact probably approach to the resurrection, at least talking about that in here. So we'll probably do a formal-ish more version of that in solid ground. If you want to participate in helping out in that in any way, you being the core of solid ground, you're invited and welcome. So please do anytime.